So Friendship is a film starring Tim Robinson of I Think You Should Leave Now, and it very much plays like, and I think I should, it very much plays like Tim Robbins' sketch show of finding kind of like awkward moments and existential dread and drawing from them the way that he would in that sketch show. This film basically feels like one of those sketches blown up into a long form. Which basically like lingers on that awkwardness, and especially, and I love the fact that we stick with that, that uncertainty and that dread, that you're conflicted about whether or not to laugh or cry at what goes down in this film. Especially, it feels like you have to do both at the same time for the deeply uncomfortable topic that it tries to address here, which is how like adult men make friends when they grow older, and how tough it is to do that right now. And what I love so much about the way that writer-director Andrew DeYoung frames this film is that he doesn't place it on any one culprit, one specific thing to blame, and it doesn't try to like kind of like radicalize Tim Robinson's character of Craig to like go over the edge. Like Craig is very much one of like those odd guys who really just can't find the right social cues to pick up on and how to read people. And he feels like he's losing touch with his family, the way that his wife, played by Kate Mara, has just recovered from a cancer diagnosis, and he's all happy for her, but he can feel that she's drifting more apart from him, the way that she's kind of obsessing over another man, and that she's more focused on her work, and how she wants more things out of life that Craig just can't give her. And then you have his son of Steven, played by Jacqueline Grazer, who's just kind of just drifting apart the way that most teenagers do, where it kind of feels like, in a few years, he's just going to be gone and kind of like forgotten about his dad. So it feels like Craig needs someone in his life to help him out. And that comes in the form of his neighbor, Austin, played by Paul Rudd. And Austin is just more than welcoming of Craig to be his new friend. Like, he comes over for beers, and immediately Austin is, talking about his job as being like a local weatherman, and Craig is impressed. And then Austin's like, well, if you think that's cool, check this out. And then he starts showing him like these like cool ancient artifacts, and then they go out hunting for mushrooms, and they go on this little adventure through the sewers. And then, Austin shows off that he's in a band and that he's really engaged with politics, and Craig is just like, this is really cool. And it puts like that little extra bounce in his step and makes him feel a lot more alive. But of course, the problem is that Craig is not great at maintaining friendships, because he can't read a social cue, and one night out with the boys ends up going a little bit wrong, and he just ends up being cut off from that friendship. And so just as easily as Craig is able to make this friend, that friend is out of his life again, and it's something that he just can't deal with and can't understand. So the rest of the film is mostly just Tim Robinson's character trying to figure out where to go next in his life and how best to make friends, or try to find something worthwhile or something to maintain. And it drives him nuts. Not just for not being able to form like another male friendship, but also just not being able to understand himself. And this is where I say it makes you want to like laugh and cry, because it's got all like the funny Tim Robinson mannerisms, but, extolled in a way that is just, is a relatable sense of anxiety. So you're laughing and just dreading the film at the same time, because you're laughing is like, look how funny Tim is. And at the same time, you're like, God, I know that's me. I know that if I make one mistake, that's going to be the problem. That's going to be what gets me cut off from my friends. That's what's going to make me into such a weirdo. That's what's going to make me further insulated and uncertain and insecure with my life. And it's just, you feel bad for him, but you also kind of want to laugh at his inability not to read so much of what's going on here. Because at one point, Craig has this drug-induced vision where he's hoping to find some meaning in his life through essentially licking a toad. And the vision that he gets is one of it's so absurd I almost don't want to mention here, but it's basically just Craig meeting Austin at a restaurant and ordering a sandwich. and that's all it is. And he kind of thinks like, oh, that's stupid. What was that? All I got was a sandwich, and just, you know, the same Tim Robinson mannerisms. But it kind of does speak to what a lot of men just want most, which is just, you know, a comfort. And I think I kind of get that, because, you know, if you go into order a sandwich, there might be like a little bit of like a chummy nature there, but it's mostly just a transaction. Like, you know where that conversation is going, you know how it's set up, you know what you want out of it, and you know how it's going to end, and you have like a little bit of connection along the way. And I think that's ultimately what a lot of men just want and aren't quite sure how to get it. Even when it's presented quite overtly here to Craig, he's still like, I don't even know what that was about. And you want to laugh because like he doesn't get it, and also cry because he might never get it. But he does. I think there is more of a connection that he forms with Austin when he recognizes the vulnerability. The one thing that I think a lot of men have that problem showing each other that doesn't come out the way that you want it to, because they establish Austin as having this friends group of guys who are very open with talking about family stuff and expressing themselves to each other, but there's still something that Austin covers up here that only Craig knows about, and that only Craig can even help cover up at one point, where it's mostly just, you know, ultimately what a lot of men want is just to be there for each other, and when they're at their most vulnerable, you know, be there to protect them, and not to just, you know, point out their flaws and laugh at each other and just stick up for them when they need it most. And the way that it comes about in the most chaotic way here, which ends up with this big climax of Tim Robinson waving around a gun and trying to, you know, and busting his car over speed bumps and stuff like, and just screaming at people. It just spirals into chaos, but at the same time it kind of loops back around to like what, you know, most men desire, without making it so simplistic or just, you know, focusing on the aspects of toxic masculinity that a lot of men could fall into with that type of mindset. And I love the way that it tries to find like the funny moments that almost like organically pop up here. Like, there's like a little bit of a joke here I think that can be made about Connor O'Malley's character, who just like comes in to insult Tim Robinson in one scene. Like, he's a friend of his wife's, and he just stumbles in there as like an average guy, and then just immediately gets into an argument and starts yelling at Tim, which, you know, if you're familiar with Connor O'Malley, he's been in a few films. He's been in like I Saw the TV Glow, and he was on the Joe Pera Talks to You. He's basically one of those like those actors who are known for exploding with anger. And he just comes in here just like almost kind of like protruding here. I love the fact that it almost feels like it's an obligation that Connor O'Malley has to show up in an A24 film. That it's almost like a cameo, because even Tim Robinson's character is like, who are you? I don't know who you are. And Connor O'Malley's just like, well, I'm supposed to be here to yell at people and get really angry and in their face and just make this comedy more maniacal and loud. And he does a great job of that. And this film, it does actually really go to some fairly dark places here, on a very deep psychological level. And I think just finding the weird humor in that makes it, you know, it gives it some levity. It allows you to both laugh and cry at this very relatable aspect of, like, you know, adult men trying and failing to understand their problems and address them and connect with other men who feel the same way and are just having such a struggle just trying to like break down that wall, that it feels like you're almost kind of like hoping that something else will bust it down, so that, you know, the person on the other side can see just how flawed you are and how much you need them and that you want them in your life. That just, you want to cry, but you kind of gotta laugh, because that's the only way to like make it bearable. So it's very much like an emotional roller coaster of a film. It's very anxiety inducing. It does have a lot of the awkwardness that comes with the I Think You Should Leave Now sketches blown up into a long form film that I feel like explores something much deeper and much more concerning beyond just, you know, like men listening to like Joe Rogan or getting on some stupid diet or listening to all this the toxic, just falling into that pit of toxic masculinity. It doesn't have to be something like that. It can just be something as simple as just, feeling that isolation and that longing to get closer to someone and reveal your fragility rather than just put up that wall again. These are, especially with like Paul Rudd and Tim Robinson, these are clearly guys who do want to connect and do have fears of opening themselves up to one another for not wanting to be hurt. And it's tragic that by the time it gets to the end of that film, after all the chaos, the fact that there is just a little bit more of a connection between the two is surprisingly rather sweet and weird and hilarious at the same time. So yeah, this film is a lot, but I think I love the way that it explores this topic in a very nuanced and amusing way. So if you love the awkwardness of the I Think You Should Leave Now sketches, you need to see Friendship, because it takes a lot of the ethos of that show and explores it in a much more like psychological and darker tone while still being amusing at the same time. So yeah, for everything that it showcases here, I loved the hell out of Friendship.